Okay, welcome back. We're here picking up where we left off last time. Last time we traced the ultimate fall of the northern kingdom, that is Israel, through a wave of invasions coming from Assyria to the north. The first led by Tiglath-Pileser in 732, the second by his son Shalmaneser around 729. Okay, and then finally completed by his general and son Sargon II, who was able to completely destroy the northern kingdom with the fall of Samaria in the important date of 722 BC. But of course, the Assyrian juggernaut was not stopped, and shortly thereafter, the Assyrian army begins to gobble up land in the territory of Judah, that is, the area belonging to the Davidic kingdom. And again, the Judahite monarchy, such that it is very much threatened with an existential crisis far greater than the one that was faced under the reign of Ahaz. The reign of Ahaz was able, in effect, to cut a deal for Judah's survival. Under this time, Ahaz's son, things don't look so good. Okay, and it may be difficult ultimately to defeat and to stave off the Assyrian invasion, but nonetheless, Israel is able to do just that. And the story of how this happens is of course one of the great messages of the book of Isaiah, in particularly the first half. It happened really under the influence of two men. First, of course, there's Isaiah. We can't forget him. He's the royal advisor. He, of course, began advising King Ahaz, around chapter 7, but ultimately begins to be even more influential under the reign of Ahaz's son, that is, King Hezekiah. King Hezekiah is seen here. Hezekiah is a great king in Jewish folklore. He's a real hero of the Davidic monarchy. He really, in some sense, spiritually anyway, personifies almost exactly what the Davidic king is supposed to be. Someone ultimately a great military leader, but one ultimately who really trusts in the Lord. And that's really what the story as presented in the book of Isaiah is about, the trust of King Hezekiah and how he's able, seemingly against all odds, to rescue his kingdom from the teeth and the claw of the Assyrians. You see, when they begin their great siege, and here they are, as depicted in another stele, another relief, as they would do, they were very, very good at besieging the cities of other countries, and Jerusalem was no exception. So much of Judah, in effect, the area of Judea, that is, had in effect fallen. The prophet Micah, for instance, pictured here, who prophesied about the same time as Isaiah did, was in the town of Moresheth, which is in Judea, just a little bit outside of Jerusalem, and he was in the town at the time the Assyrian army came in and conquered it, as he recounts in his prophetic book. Okay, so basically, there's not a whole lot left of Israel except Jerusalem. Okay, if you want, Jerusalem is a tiny little fortress, a tiny little beachhead of Yahweh, surrounded by this hostile army, okay, and led only by the heroic King Hezekiah. Now, how did King Hezekiah survive? Well, this is, of course, one of the great historical puzzles of what really happened in this particular chain of events. No one's exactly sure how this exactly went down. All right, and one of the great points of confusion is that there seems to have been at least one point where Hezekiah attempts to negotiate for security through the payment of tributes, as was customary then in those days. But we see also that after the payment of tribute is offered, and in the book of 2 Kings describes this, that nonetheless the king of Assyria of Sennacherib, and he's seen here. He is the great grandson of Tiglath-Pileser, and in the line of descent of the Assyrian rulers who conquered the northern kingdom, is now setting his sights on Jerusalem itself and is leading a siege around the tiny little fortress that's left. Okay, so did he change his mind after having been bought off the first time? Was the tribute the only thing that really happened? Was there never a siege? Well, the problem with that view is that it's not only contradicted by the Bible itself in the rest of the account that we get in Kings and in the account in Isaiah chapter 36 and 37, but it's also contradicted by some of the other features. In other words, we see here the wall, the great wall of Jerusalem that's been preserved. This is, of course, the great place in which the successful standoff took place, in which Jerusalem, against all odds, was able to hold out. Not only that, but you see that the great tunnels that Hezekiah dug have been preserved as well. These particular tunnels were very important. Not only did they enable the flow of goods to come in and out of the city, but that they actually really were more for the flow of water and the ability of water to come in and out of the city, and therefore enable Jerusalem to last against the siege here. And you see here that the pool of Siloam, or sometimes called the pool of Hezekiah, wherein in John 9 Jesus heals the blind man. Well, this is also very famous for being the area in which Hezekiah was able to draw away enough water so that the city could survive the Assyrian onslaught. Okay, having survived the Assyrian onslaught, the great story of Hezekiah's heroism is pretty much locked in stone, and there's so many enough archaeological tradition and enough biblical tradition, I think, that it's hard for me to believe that it's entirely legendary. I'm not sure exactly how the event went down, and I think it's a great puzzle, but I don't believe it's entirely fabricated as many interpreters do. But at the same time, I think it's very important to ascertain what happened and to continue to research this. But as it is, this is a tremendous story of Hezekiah's great heroism, and again, ultimately, Isaiah in his great military and political advice. Hezekiah and Jerusalem stayed firm because Hezekiah, in no small part, listened to his royal advisor. Isaiah assured him that Yahweh would remain true, that Yahweh would remain true to his covenant, and sure enough, he did. So that Jerusalem survives, but really only by the skin of her teeth, and really, in some sense, looking at the issue in a broader political military context, you can see here Judah is basically just an island surrounded by the sea of the great Assyrian Empire. Judah was, in effect, reduced to a vassal state. In other words, there wasn't any great victory in the sense that the great power of Assyria was broken. This didn't happen until much later. But you can see that nonetheless there is a victory of sorts. There is a moral victory. The kings of Judah are able to, by the skin of their teeth, retain a toehold upon the throne of David, which still continues to last for over another century after this great event in 701. So this is a very, very fascinating event in history, and of course much of the theology of the book of Isaiah is based on this, the idea of standing firm in the face of moral onslaughts, the idea of trusting in the Lord, the idea of holding out, against all odds, the idea of God's fidelity to his throne. This is very much an idea that sort of takes root in this period of time. Now, historically, of course, the story gets a lot more complicated than this, and it gets complicated because, of course, Assyria is, in effect, but a tool, the book of Isaiah shows us, to show Yahweh's power. Ultimately, the power of Assyria will itself be broken, and we know how this happens. Okay, this happens through the rise ultimately of Babylon. Okay, and just looking forward here, you can see the Battle of Carchemish, which we'll talk about more next time, was really where the power of Assyria was finally broken in the late 7th century BC, actually 605 BC. But you see that the real triumph of Israel is trusting in Yahweh, and ultimately Yahweh's covenant fidelity, which is, of course, going to be the big springboard of how the beautiful poetry happens in the second half of the book of Isaiah, which in effect helps people to sort out what's going to happen in this horrible time of exile when Judah finally is conquered by Babylon. That in many ways the fidelity of Yahweh, as seen in the great Assyrian crisis of 701, will in some way be the basis on which the poet of the second half of the book is going to convince the people that God will in fact pull Israel through, what's left of Israel anyway. Okay, well, with that, let's return next week and we will talk more about the rise of Babylon.